fiction is a waste of time. Genuinely, that's what I thought. I didn't see it as something useful or productive. But that is one of the most sinister lies of the entire reading world. It hurts me, it might be hurting you, and reports show that it uniquely hurts men as a class. Reading is on the decline in general, sure, but men are especially leaning away from fiction, and that is worrying. And what I say here might surprise you, but I get it. Because the value of non-fiction is clear. There's a clear promise, you know what you're getting into, sorted. But you can't say the same with fiction because the value is foggy, it's vague, it's often hidden. And you might just see it as some dusty old book you had to read in school. What's the point? But obviously that couldn't be further from the truth because fiction is some of the richest and most insightful work that you can put your hands on. And there's a reason it's been around for, I think, thousands of years longer than non-fiction has. That's not by accident. So coming up, I'll show you the raw, concrete value of fiction, why stories are so impactful for both you and society, and if you stay to the end, some tips on how you can make your fiction reading easier and more fun, because that matters. And maybe some recommendations too, so stay tuned. First up is that fiction has gravity. A common criticism of fiction is, like I said, it doesn't feel helpful to a new reader. Who cares about some Russian guy's mental issues when you could just read How to Unfuck Your Life? And then you walk away, hopefully with an unfucked life. Now, it makes me sad even uttering that sentence. That's disgusting. I'm sorry you had to hear that. A common criticism of fiction is that, like I said, it doesn't feel useful to the new reader. Non-fiction, and especially, modern self-help and pop psychology, it prides itself in being as concise and pragmatic and to the point as possible. And like those NPCs you see on LinkedIn, they really want to remove all that fluff and deliver maximum value, whatever that means, in as few words as possible. And if they really think you're a moron, they'll remove the text entirely and just put, these wishy-washy motivational diagrams. It's bullshit. Now, on paper, this sounds good and effective, right? Like, it's the same message, but with fewer words. It's more concise. But the big mistake they are making here is that they abandon the emotional weight of a good story. Now, I could be blunt and just explain it, but I'm going to use a story instead. You see what I did there? In Breaking Bad, the main protagonist, Walter White, is stuck in a dilemma because his partner, Jesse Pinkman, is hot for revenge for a local drug gang. He wants to strike back against them. They wronged him. He wants to kill them. The problem is Walter and Jesse work for the same boss as this other drug gang. So if Jesse loses his temper and does anything stupid, he might involve the police and bring down the entire operation, this multi-decade long project. To figure out a solution, Walter talks with, his colleague, Mike Ehrmantraut. And he suggests getting Jesse arrested to keep him out of the way, put him in jail. Problem solved, right? But Mike disagrees. And he says this is a half measure. He says this is a compromise that is going to bite them in the arse.
No more half measures, Walter.
And so really he's implying that Walter goes all the way, takes the full measure, and kills Jesse, or arranges his death somehow. Now I want you to pause in that sentence, no half measures. Now you might read that and think, okay, whatever, it's just another saying. You'll forget about it the next day, life goes on. But the reason this stuck with me, and the reason it was quite a disturbing scene actually, is because Mike doesn't just say it to Walter, no half measures, he pairs it with a story from his past as a police officer, and a deeply emotional one at that. Mike recalled how again and again he would deal with this alcoholic wife beater.
But there was this one guy, this one piece of shit that I will never forget.
And every time he got drunk and violent against his wife, he would get arrested, sure, but because his battered wife was too afraid to press charges, nothing would happen. He would see no consequence.
Nothing we could do but pass her off to the EMTs, put him in a car, drive him downtown, throw him in a drunk tank. He sleeps it off, next morning out he goes.
On yet another arrest, Mike lost his patience. He could not stand to see this abuse continue. And he said, you know what, screw the legal route.
We're driving into town, and this sideways asshole is in my back seat humming Danny Boy. And it just rubbed me wrong.
Mike drove the wife beater to a secluded part of the forest, stuck his gun in his mouth, and threatened to end it then and there.
And I put my revolver in his mouth. And I told him, this is it. This is how it ends.
And naturally, the suspect was pleading for his life. He was begging. He was saying, please, I won't do it again. I won't do it again. And Mike listened.
And after a few minutes, I took the gun out of his mouth. And I say, so help me, if you ever touch her again, I will such and such and such and such.
He let him off with a warning after seeing him beg for his life like that. And it turns out that was Mike's half measure. That was his big mistake, because he would go on to murder his wife 2 weeks later.
We got there, there was so much blood you could taste the metal. The moral of the story is, I chose a half measure when I should have gone all the way.
What could have been just another generic quote now has a story behind it. A story of anguish and shame and regret and violence. And that is why it cuts us so deeply. It's why I remembered it even many years after watching the show. And it's why it impacts the reader so deeply as it does. And of course, within the show, you can tell it had an impact on Walter as well, because of what it does later, you'd see. And tying that back to fiction, yes, it's often dense. It's often very thorough, and it might drag on a little bit sometimes. But it's exactly that storytelling and that world building which gives an emotional weight to the morals and the messages and the themes. That is the gravity we're talking about. Now sure, you could boil it down to a summary like some apps do. You could read the Wikipedia page for it, or you could watch someone's video essay, but none of that is going to cut you as deeply as if you read the book itself, because it has that gravity to it. This so-called fluff that everyone's trying to remove nowadays might be exactly the substance you need to get the point across. And that's why even non-fiction authors will use a story to make a message. Now this works on an individual level. I'm sure you can think of a novel or a story that has stuck with you and touched you deeply. But did you know this emotional gravity can steer entire societies and civilizations, and actually continues to do so? I have a good example which we'll look at a bit later. First, I want to tell you how I've been practicing my own storytelling, because I use it for this, and really it's the core of every creative domain. You are just telling a good story. Skillshare, today's sponsor, has been one of my favorite sources for learning this. They are an online library with classes in every kind of creative realm, from video editing to art to productivity, and even many more niche crafts that you might be into. The most recent one I did was called Creative Writing Essentials, writing standout opening scenes. Now there's a lot of crossover with writing my video openings, and I was reminded of the power of an engaging verb to immediately hook the viewer or the reader. The class creators take years of experience and condense them into short videos that guide you through the essentials. And as someone who always stresses structure in learning, this is my favorite format to see. I love it. There's even learning paths which take that idea further and give you a complete roadmap for growing your creative skills. To try Skillshare for yourself, you can click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. And the first 500 people to do so will get a 1-month free trial. So have fun exploring, and thank you to Skillshare. To see how the emotional power of fiction can steer entire societies, we can turn to the ancient Greek tragedy of the Oresteia, written by Aeschylus. This is a story set after the fall of Troy, the Trojan War, and we see King Agamemnon of the Greek side return home after many years of brutal fighting. However, he didn't step back into this cozy, welcoming home. He was stepping into an ambush, because his wife Clytemnestra was understandably furious that he chose to sacrifice their oldest daughter, Iphigenia, to appease the gods and to calm the seas so that they could invade Troy many years before. Now, she was actually plotting his murder, and we see an awkward sort of interaction between them as it builds up to that. So he is killed in the end. Sorry for the spoilers, it's been out a while, so it's kind of on you, but years after Agamemnon's murder, his son Orestes is commanded by Apollo to return home and essentially avenge his father, meaning he has to kill his own mum. Orestes was now stuck in this impossible position. Does he disobey the gods and not avenge his father? Well, that's a grave sin. But then does he kill his own mother? That's equally a grave sin. And in the end, with great hesitation, he finally brings himself to do the deed, to murder Clytemnestra, his own mother that raised him. Now this polluted his soul, and it angered the Erinyes, these goddesses of vengeance, and they would chase him mercilessly until he eventually found refuge with the goddess Athena. At the Areopagos, which you can still visit today in Athens, Athena organized the first ever courtroom trial, and it was here that the matter was settled, and Orestes was actually found not guilty. He was free, and he broke this cycle of revenge and conflict and murder. Now, though a myth and performed as a tragedy, the Oresteia was a reflection of Greek society. The Areopagos was real. Divine punishment was real, and the question of justice through vengeance versus the courtrooms, that was a real question they had to deal with. Now, at the time this was performed, there were reforms going on with the Areopagos, and some say that Aeschylus was using the visceral emotions of this play to argue something, to make a moral point, maybe for or against these reforms. Now that's not new, and it's not old either, because thousands of years later we are still using books and movies and films to influence how people think, to use emotions to steer society in a certain way. And people realize that. People fight over who controls the media, people fight over the culture wars. This stuff matters. It's a source of power and influence. Now, of course, just because it's a story doesn't make it true. And just because you feel emotionally touched by it, still doesn't make it true or valid necessarily. But I'm making this point to show you just how powerful a story is and just how much it will touch you more than non-fiction will, at least most of the time. That is the emotional gravity of fiction, and you don't really see it anywhere else, to be honest. Number 2 is self-reflection. Fiction matters because without it, you may never discover who you are. And I know that sounds a bit wishy-washy, but it's real. Because fans of non-fiction, they say, well, I prefer non-fiction because I get to learn more, and I get to learn from the experience and the mistakes of others. And that's very true, fair enough. But fiction is the same. You are living through other people's lives, and very intimately at that. Unlike with movies or video games, for example, fiction, you have to build the universe yourself with your imagination. And this is now the world you occupy. You stand with the characters as if you are there yourself. You see yourself in their decisions, and you almost get to know them as real people, like you're really there. You criticize them, you relate to them, you feel for them, you feel betrayed by them sometimes. And you almost put yourself in their shoes and think, well, what would I have done in that situation? Like, would my decisions follow this? Maybe at the end you walk away feeling inspired or motivated to be like them, to be better. Or maybe you have to avoid those decisions that led to their horrible fate, and you have to learn from that in your own life. In either case, you come to understand a different mind, a different individual, with their unique fears and hopes and dreams. And there's a good body of research to show that that improves your empathy and theory of mind. And I guess it makes sense. You are quite literally living through other people's lives and seeing the world in a way that you've never seen it before. For example, I'm rereading The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck's great book. And this is a story of poverty and family and migration away from the Dust Bowl of America. And this is far removed from me in both class, in time, in location. It's nothing to do with me. And even so, Steinbeck writes in such a way that makes me feel for these people. And I see their life as if I was there with them, as if I was traveling to California for hopes of a better life. And that probably is a reflection of someone's real life in history, where they had to go through that same desperate migration. Again, yeah, I'm just a suburban middle-class white guy. Steinbeck gave me a life to live through. And that changes how I see modern cases of poverty or alienation. And really, it's like I've traveled there without ever being there. Fiction helps you with empathy, helps you to see other people, but that's where most people would stop. And for someone stone cold like me, it's not enough. It's like, okay, cool, I can be an empath or whatever. But fiction is not just a way to understand other people, but yourself. It's a form of self-discovery and reflection. Fiction reveals that you have no idea who you really are. You may think you do, but you don't, you really don't. And the more you read, the more you come to understand this face in the mirror. The parts of your psyche that are hidden, the parts that you don't want to believe about yourself, or the parts that you have never believed to be there. Literary critic Harold Bloom describes this process as overhearing yourself, where, like in A Christmas Carol with the repentant Scrooge, you are literally watching the characters and the events unfold, and that gives you the space and the clarity to analyze yourself and to come to know who you are almost more objectively. Through the plot and through the characters and through their mistakes and their decisions, you come to understand your own weaknesses, your own tendencies and your own sympathies. That gut feeling that you have while you're reading, that the characters you relate to, the characters you hate, that is an indicator of who you are. That is a telltale sign of something in your own brain. Like journaling, or maybe having a chat with a good friend, you can sort of set your ego aside and say, well, let's have an honest look at who I am. Like, who am I? Let's figure it out. Now, don't get too excited, because I'm not promising some enlightenment with every novel you read. Like, oh, it's literally me. It's not the case. It's not going to happen. Not all stories are written as masterfully as the next, and not all characters will make sense to you or even make you feel something. For example, for a modern audience, they might read the Iliad and see Achilles as this almost petty character. He's a bit whiny. But then if you share his values of honor and glory, like many would have done back then, you just get him. It makes more sense. It's more resonant. You understand him more as a character, as in all of his depth. And you have to get him like me. We're close like that. In most cases, you might finish a book thinking, okay, he was interesting, fair enough, cool. And that's the end of it. But every now and then, you will find this character that almost feels like it's calling you out. It's almost like a reflection of yourself and your insecurities and your hopes and fears. And it's like you're reading yourself. And those moments, when you do find them, it makes fiction worth it. It makes that self-discovery come to life and feel real and makes you almost feel vulnerable. These characters will show you your darkest shadows and your brightest lights and everything in between, because you get them. and they resonate with you. And I mean, even if they don't, it's a chance to see something different, something you wouldn't normally see. Third, and perhaps my favorite reason to read fiction, is the cultural understanding and connection. Because you know that saying, to travel is the best medicine. It's not that. To travel is to live, or to travel, it makes you less racist. I don't know, I forget. But the point is, there is this idea that travel is how you experience more and how you build a deeper and wider understanding of the world. And that is true. By immersing yourself in different cultures and experiencing these new social fabrics and talking to these strange new people, well, okay, they don't have to be strange, but it changes you. It changes you, and it changes how you see the world, and it sort of shatters your old images of how life is. Because yes, we live in our own country, we live in a bubble of what we know, and that's fine, but it's not what the world is. You see how people are, you see what they do, how they talk, how they interact with each other, how their heritage has defined their modern society. And that really is eye-opening. And I mean this sincerely, not like some out-of-touch Bali backpacker who's in some resort. Like, oh my God, you guys, this is how the locals live. It's not like that. I mean a sincere appreciation for something different. And then when you come home, it puts things into perspective because you have a wider view of the world. You've literally seen through another window of humanity, and that can reframe how you approach your daily life. Now, why am I talking about travel here? Well, it's relevant because reading fiction is how you do exactly that, but without leaving your bedroom. It's that powerful. And you might say, well, it's a story, it's not real. It's fiction, right? Yes, but even then, stories have always formed or at least reflected the culture and the mythos and the origin of a people, even though they aren't like literal historic accounts. The Homeric epics defined how Greece, and by extension a lot of Europe, saw heroism, fate, and honour. In Britain, the Arthurian legends were emblems of chivalry and proper kingship, and even the origin of the British as a people, as a power. And further to the east, you've seen epics like the Bhagavad Gita described as, the essence of Hinduism. And downstream of that is a lot of politics and philosophy and how people live. And I could go on forever. I could talk about all these founding myths and these stories and these tales that have influenced how we live, our politics, our society, our culture. And these stories and these legends are so deeply integrated that we don't even realize they exist. Just like a fish cannot describe the water around it, they are so base to us, they are so fundamental that we don't really see them, we take them for granted. And by reading fiction, we remind ourselves, like, this is how we came to be, this is who we are, this is how a nation, how a people think. So if you want to know people, if you want to know how they are, if you want to know where cultures came from and what cultures produce, then you have to read fiction. Maybe it's second to travel, I don't care, but as someone who loves history and who loves people, fiction is the place to start. After my piercing rhetoric, there is now a 100% chance you see the value of fiction. And that doesn't matter though if you don't know where to put your first foot forward. Because I'll admit, years ago when I was trying to get more into fiction, I didn't know where to begin. And I was lost and I was bored, honestly. And it took me ages to see the value of it in practice. Today, about half the books I read are fiction, which is crazy thinking about it. And I want to share some of those tips that I've learned and stolen from other people of how I've made my reading more engaging, more fun, and more productive in the sense I talked about earlier. And I'll start from the more entry-level tips to the more abstract, maybe philosophical ones that might make less sense, but you'll see. First, if you absolutely do not read fiction and you need a gateway drug into it, something to sort of lubricate, something to like ease you into it, then I would recommend reading memoirs or history. Now, these genres are an interesting mix of both fiction and non-fiction. Because yes, while they are real historical things that happened, they also blend story into that. And the authors have to give you a narrative to pull you along and to make it interesting. A good writer must immerse you in the same way as a novelist would, with world building and with storytelling and with action and all of these different things that you see in fiction. And as you get used to these fictional devices and structures, it becomes way easier to make that jump to true fiction. Because at the end of the day, what is fiction? It's a history or a memoir of something that never existed or didn't exist as it's written. So there is a kind of a gray area between those subjects. So remember, memoirs and history, they're a gateway drug. I'll put some recommendations on the screen, but off the top of my head, I can think of Storm of Steel by Ernst Jünger, great one. I liked Nelson Mandela's autobiography. There was Malcolm X's one, that was good. Tom Holland, I think, writes nicely, nice narrative accounts of fiction. And there's so many really to explore, so have a look. Number 2 is to read fiction in parallel to non-fiction. Because again, if you feel like you have to ease yourself into it, taking that jump immediately and switching to fiction, it might startle you, it might feel a bit strange. So what you can do is, as you are reading one of your non-fiction books, you pair it with some fiction, and you can switch between them. Depending on how you feel, you can keep the variety going, it's much easier. This is what I do. And if you want even more variety, you can add more books to that rotation. You can say, well, okay, I'm going to read a light and a heavy fiction and a light and a heavy non-fiction. And so you can switch things up, and depending on your mood and your energy, pick the right book for you at that time. If you struggle with fiction and you pick one book to read, like this massive, dense tome, the Count of Monte Cristo or something, yeah, you can feel unmotivated at times and like it's too big a challenge. And that's why you spread that out, you choose different difficulty levels, and it makes it easier. The mentally ill among us, they'll have 10 books going on at the same time, and that's too far for me, but you can mix it up, you can do whatever you want. I don't judge. I do a bit, but whatever. Number 3 is to read for immersion. Now, most people don't have a problem with fiction because there's something wrong with the book. It's because they don't let themselves get immersed in the first place. Back when my attention span was worse, I would read maybe 20 pages a day. And looking back, it's like, yeah, no shit, I wasn't having fun. It's like watching 20 minutes of a film, pausing, waiting a whole day, and then watching the next 20 minutes and so on. If you interrupt the reading too often and too quickly, you never reach that sort of critical mass of immersion. You never give yourself the chance to enter the flow state and to be sucked along by the story. When you do reach that point with some patience, well, the reading becomes easy and it becomes fun because you're totally absorbed by it. And you can go on for ages, for hours if you have the time. So I recommend 2 things. The first is to train your attention span to tolerate that initial friction. Because yes, reading is comparatively less stimulating than playing video games or scrolling. And so you have to find that balance again and be able to tolerate it in the first place. And the second thing you should do, maybe the most important, is to be consistent. Because big gaps will chop up your immersion, it will kill it completely, it will force you to get back into the story every single time. It's no good. So try and read every day, try and be consistent, try not to stop reading for too long, because it will cut you out the story and you'll forget where you are, you'll forget who the characters are, it's a mess. Now this is harder, but I also try and read fiction in as few sittings as possible. Because the longer your reading sessions can be, the more likely you are to get immersed, and you can use that momentum to take you along much further. It's both more fun and you end up reading more, which is also good. Now, if you struggle to be consistent, then this next tip is going to help you a lot. Number 4 is to read without analyzing. And I know that sounds crazy, especially coming from me, but you have to hear me out. You cannot approach fiction with a non-fiction brain. You might enter a novel or a play or a poem looking for the analysis, looking for things to write about, to take notes on. And it makes sense. That is what you consider deep reading or active reading, all of these good things, right? You stop to take notes, you look at commentaries, you look at videos, and you do all these things that these YouTubers tell you to do. But that is not necessarily the right thing in that moment. By stopping to study every single little detail, you risk losing sight of the bigger picture and ultimately your immersion. And by the time you get to the end of the play or the book, you may not understand how those notes and how those details fit into the grand story, which is the most important thing at the end of the day. Like, sure, you can analyze the characters, you can tell me about the themes or the literary devices, but can you tell me what happened? Can you summarize the story in a single sentence? Because that ultimately is proof that you've understood the events A to B, the plot, the conflict, everything. I know it feels wrong if you're the more completionist type, the more autistic type. I am as well, I get it. But I recommend in the first read through to just power through the book without stopping, without looking at commentaries, without going on YouTube. And if you are to take notes, keep them minimal, keep them simple, and never interrupt your flow. At most, I'll jot down like a little phrase every now and then, just to remind me. But there is no stopping, because you need to understand the plot, as an entirety, as something complete and finished. After you finish, or maybe during your second read through, well, now you can slow down. Now that you have a picture of the plot, you can stop to look at the details, you can zoom in on things, you can see how they fit into the wider picture. But that is only possible if you give yourself that bedrock in the first place. And finally, try to emotionally surrender to the story. And I know this sounds a bit weird and artsy, but let me explain. With more bizarre or abstract forms of fiction, and art in general, we have a tendency to resist it, to think, oh, I don't know about this. This is a bit weird, it's a bit odd, it's not for me. And you resist the effect that the author is trying to have on you. You say, no, I'm not going to go along with that. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And look, art is complicated, but in some cases we have to be willing to say, okay, I'll listen. I'll trust you. I'll see where you're going with this. And it's only by giving them that permission, giving yourself the chance to surrender emotionally, well, can you be taken along on that ride, and maybe it'll end up somewhere great. I think if you resist from the very beginning and you say, well, this isn't for me, I don't like this, it's a bit abstract, it's a bit weird, maybe it is, maybe you're right, but give it a chance. Because you might be reading something that is going to change your life and you are not letting yourself, you're not letting the book work on you in the first place. So try not to swim against the current too much. Try not to resist the emotions. Try not to, nitpick everything that you don't like. Sometimes it's worth to just go along with the story, see what the author has to say, and who knows, maybe you're right, maybe it's some artsy bullshit, or maybe it's the best novel you've ever read. You have to give it a chance. Honestly, I'm quite new to fiction myself, so if you have any tips, if you have any good ways to approach fiction, maybe some recommendations, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to get discussion going in the comments. It's useful for both you, for me, for everyone really, it's great. And if you like this video and this style, then I'm going to link one about classics on screen, which I think you'll also like, so have a look at that. And of course, thank you so much for watching, I appreciate it.